Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to today's event, Spotlight on Coastal Areas in Small Island Developing States, from Vulnerability to Resilience. My name is Victoria Varga-Lencsés. I am a Senior Fishery Officer from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and I work in the FAO Fisheries Division. I will be your moderator today. I lead the second phase of the Common Oceans Program. This second phase of the program has around 65 partners for the next 5 years. It is a global partnership funded by the Global Environment Facility that promotes sustainable fisheries and conservation of marine biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. Led by FAO, the program brings together United Nations programs, UNDP, UNEP, regional fisheries management organizations, intergovernmental organizations, the private sector, civil society, and academia. I'm here today also because climate change is important for the SIDS. Climate change is expected to lead the redistribution of tuna from EEZs, economic exclusive zones, to high sea areas. It is also likely to result in a larger proportion of the catch being made in international waters, which would have economic and social consequences, for example, for some Pacific islands, which derive substantial revenue from tuna fishing license fees. Therefore, SIDS are key stakeholders of this program. They will benefit from project outcomes that affect them directly, affect their ability to better manage the ABNJ tuna fisheries. For example, they will get market-based approaches, support for market-based approaches. They will work towards achievement of sustainability certification, and that will improve their fishing practices. They will also benefit from capacity building activities through our program. They will be able to tackle technical challenges related to specific sectors, but also multi-sectoral collaboration, which is essential for addressing global challenges like climate change in these areas. This event today is part of a series organized by FAO and its partners, featuring small island developing states coastal areas. The objective of our event is to share with you results of climate data and findings in relation to these small island developing states. And we would like to also showcase practical climate solutions and policy measures taken by some of the small island developing states. We have here the representatives from Vanuatu and Cape Verde, and they will talk about their experiences. In particular, our speakers and panelists will showcase what coastal areas in SIDS may have to endure in terms of environmental impacts. There will be two specific examples that relate to coastal hazards and to changes in fish species distributions. We will also discuss how SIDS can catalyze ambition and action for improved resilience. Before we get started, I would like to share with you some housekeeping information. This event is recorded. The recording will be made available on the virtual Ocean Pavilion platform for you. The chat function is enabled for you. You can share your thoughts with us, or you can request assistance by using this function. There will be also a Q&A session at the end of the panel discussion after the presentations, and we encourage you to ask your questions during this session. You can do that by submitting your questions through the Zoom's Q&A function, which is a dedicated function. You can find the related button under the list of panelists and speakers and attendees. To ensure the smooth running of the events, I would like to ask everybody to mute their microphones to avoid any interferences. And with that, I'm finished with the housekeeping and we can get to the substance of the event. But before doing so, I would like to start with a small poll. So we will, Shusha, my colleague, will quickly launch this on your screens. You will see the questions. And I kindly ask you to reply that. We have a very good answering rate and also a really good coverage of the world. Thank you for being here with us from Africa, Asia and the Pacific, Europe and North America. However, I have to say today we don't have any participants from Latin America and the Caribbean zones. I hope there will be an opportunity for representatives of the small island states from those regions to look at our recording. And in terms of sectors, we have participants here covering almost all stakeholders: science, academia, government, UN entities, intergovernmental organizations, NGOs, and of course, there are some participants who did not mark what organizations they represent. And with that, I think we can end the poll. That gives us a good overview. Thank you for being here with us today. And I will right away start by asking Mr. Stefan Jon Hafstein to give his presentation. He is a special envoy for ocean affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Iceland. He is also chair of the Aquatic Blue Coalition, which is a coalition of representatives from national governments, intergovernmental organizations, NGOs, academic institutions, aquatic food producers, and consumer groups, financial institutions, and philanthropies. This is a multi-sectoral coalition. It was launched this year at the United Nations Oceans Conference, and it is a key milestone because it promotes to reach the full potential of blue foods, to help end malnutrition, and to build a nature-positive, equitable, and resilient food systems. Stefan will give us opening remarks, and he will do that through a video message. We opted for this solution to avoid any technical problems with the presentations, but I would like to mention that all our panelists are here today with us online, so you can ask your questions to them directly. Please, Stefan, go ahead with the presentation.
Dear colleagues, thanks to FAO for organizing this and other events at this important conference. And thanks for focusing on small island development states in the context of the climate crisis. I am speaking from Iceland on behalf of the Aquatic and Blue Food Coalition, one of the many coalitions that came out of the Food System Summit a year ago, but the only one addressing SDG 14. In the work of our coalition, we have noticed that aquatic and blue food is underfunded, undervalued, and underrepresented in the global dialogue on food systems and interlinkages with the climate crisis. This, despite the fact that UNDP estimates that the ocean output in economic terms is at least 2.3 trillion USD per year, equal to Germany. As an independent economy, the ocean would be the 5th largest in the world according to the same source. But ocean mismanagement costs us around 1 trillion USD per year, almost half of the worth. I do not need to explain the pressure on our ocean to this audience. Much of it is due to overheating of our planet, but also due to various other aspects of mismanagement. The ocean is an inseparable part of the climate crisis, but it is also a part of the solution. This is one area where we do have potential for growth, improvement in nutrition of populations, and at the same time be climate friendly and pro-poor. The Blue Transformation Roadmap of FAO recognizes the importance of aquatic food systems as drivers of economic growth, social development, and environmental recovery. In the UNDP Ocean Promise, the overall goal is clear. By 2030, 100 coastal countries, including all SIDS, realize the maximum potential of their blue economies through sustainable, low emission and climate resilient ocean use that grows economies and improves food security, no less. In a recent study of the Blue Food Assessment, we see that no corner of the world will be spared the dangers of the climate crisis in coming decades. Investments in adaptation and resilience are urgently needed to ensure sustained blue food contributions under climate change, particularly in Africa, South and Southeast Asia, and small island developing states. It is important to consider blue foods as part of visions for a net zero economy, because many blue foods produce lower greenhouse gas emissions than land-based food production. Blue foods can play a key role in creating healthier, low-carbon, climate-resilient food systems. Therefore, blue foods need to be on the menu of climate action at this COP. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan, for setting the scene. And you underlined the importance of aquatic food systems and the role of the oceans in addressing the climate crisis. This is highly relevant for the small island developing states because they are at the forefront of actions to tackle climate change. They need to address not only their environmental vulnerabilities, they need to build economic resilience. And as you just said, aquatic food systems and the ocean resources are part of the solution. With that, what you mentioned about blue transformation, it means a change where fisheries and aquaculture will become sustainable, low emission and climate resilience. This will allow for feeding the world's growing population more sustainably. And with that, I would like to move ahead to the next presentation, which will put a spotlight on the coastal areas of the small island developing states. In this spotlight, we have the pleasure to have with us Dr. Lars Rosendahl Appelquist from the Coastal Hazard Wheel Initiative and Mr. Gerrit Hendriksen from Deltares. They will map coastal conditions and hazards for the small island developing states and will help to identify relevant coastal adaptation challenges. The Coastal Hazard Initiative is a platform to make information on global coastal classification and adaptation available and open access. I think this is very important. Lars and Gerrit, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the word. I would like to present some perspectives on how to tackle coastal adaptation challenges in the world's small island developing states. My name is Lars Rosendahl Appelquist, and I'm the founding head of the Coastal Hazard Wheel Initiative, and my colleague Gerrit Hendriksen, who is a senior spatial data specialist at Deltares, will cover the last part of this presentation. If we look at the world's small island developing states, these are island nations in the Caribbean, the Pacific, the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, and the South China Sea, and total FAO has 40 SIDS members and 1 associate member. The total population of the SIDS together are about 65 million people, and if one includes local coastal features, we have calculated the total length of the SIDS coastlines to about 107,000 kilometers. So taking a look at the coastal environments of the SIDS, we can see from the images here that they have a high degree of diversity and also very complex coastal systems. They have very different characteristics both within the SIDS and across the SIDS, and that also means that they have very different hazard profiles, and there's a great difference in what are relevant adaptation solutions. So in order to have a full systematic classification hazard mapping, and identification of relevant adaptation solutions for all the SIDS, we're using the Coastal Hazard Wheel. The Coastal Hazard Wheel is a universal coastal adaptation framework for the world's coast that I have developed, and it can be used for classifying coastal areas with 300 meters detail, for multi-hazard assessment, for identification of relevant adaptation solutions, and for standardizing coastal communication. And for FAO, we are developing adaptation overviews for all the world's SIDS to guide adaptation planning and policy making. So using this system to take a closer look at the SIDS coastlines, we can get an overview of the most prevalent coastal types of the world's SIDS in terms of coastal length. And again, from the images to the left, we can see there's a great diversity in coastal environments across the SIDS. So the most common coastal types in the SIDS are the sloping hard rock type, the corals type called R3 in the coastal classification system of the Coastal Hazard Wheel, and these type of coast covers 19% of all the SIDS coastlines. The second most common coastal type are sloping hard rock with corals, covering 9.3%, while the third most common are flat hard rock with tropical cyclones, covering 8.4%. The fourth most common are flat hard rock with mangroves and tropical cyclones, covering 5.5%, and the fifth most common are coral islands of the type with sediment balance and no tropical cyclones, having the code CI6, covering 5.2%. And the public image of SIDS are often something similar to this example is the CI6 type from Kiribati shown in the image to the right. But as you can see here, the diversity of the coastal environments of SIDS are much more than that. So using this coastal classification approach, we can identify what are the hazard exposures to these coastlines under the projected climate change. And taking a closer look at the SIDS coastlines for the 5 key hazard types, which are included in the Coastal Hazard Wheel system, we can get an overview of how big is the exposure to the SIDS from these hazard types. And as we can see here, for these 5 hazard types, several of the types, including ecosystem disruption, gradient inundation, and flooding, has 50% or more percent of the SIDS coastline exposed to high and very high hazard levels. And the other ones have 1/3 of the SIDS coastlines exposed to high and very high hazard levels. So we see there's extensive exposure across the SIDS coastlines to all these 5 key coastal hazard types. So using these hazard types as base, we can also get an understanding of how many people and assets are actually exposed to these hazard types at high and very high hazard levels. And for here we can see that especially for gradient inundation and flooding, there's 18 million people and 16 million people exposed to high and very high hazard levels. That's almost 1/3 of the total population of the SIDS. And also for the other hazard types, as you can see here, there's a significant amount of the total SIDS population exposed to high and very high hazard levels under the projected climate change. So it's a serious exposure here. We can then use the classification of the coastlines and the hazard profiles to identify what could be done at a special national level, a special national SIDS level. So taking a closer look at Haiti as example, we have identified 24 different coastal types, where the main ones are the hard rock type, the R3 and R1, the flat hard rock types, and the sedimentary plain types. And based on this, we can get an understanding of what are the hazard presence across the Haiti coastline. And that covers the 5 coastal hazard types, where the image to the right, or the map to the right, displays the flooding hazard map, and similar maps are created for all the different hazard types. And we can see we can get a clear image of where are the hazard hotspots present and where would it be relevant to take action. Based on this, we can also get an exposure understanding at national level to see how many people and how many the assets are exposed to hazards at national level. And looking again at flooding, for example, a total of 2.4 million people and $5.2 billion in asset values are exposed to high and very high hazard levels in Haiti. This is also significant amounts of people and also assets. Based on this classification and the hazard profiling, we can then go one step further and see what are relevant adaptation solutions at national level and local level. So again, taking a look at Haiti, we can actually get an overview of what are the hazard levels used across Haiti, and also for 300 meters detailed coastal sections, what would be relevant to do here. And here is an overview of the most commonly recommended hazard management solutions for Haiti, such as ecosystem-based management, mangrove restoration, coastal zoning, dikes, and so forth. And these hazard measures address either one hazard type, and some of the measures can address several hazard types at the same goal. So it's of course important to be aware of where could there be co-benefits of a specific hazard management measure. So for FAO, we're developing 41 briefs covering all the world's SIDS, providing information on the coastal hazard wheel methodology, the coastal types, the hazard mapping, the exposure statistics, and relevant adaptation solutions. We also make an updated version of the Coastal Hazard Wheel app with new data sets especially targeted at the SIDS. And these things will be launched a bit into next year. But for now, Gerhard, my colleague Gerhard Henriksen, will make a demonstration of the current version of the Coastal Hazard Wheel app, which is available and it was actually launched just this summer. So this is also a quite new system. So now I'll hand over to Gerhard, and please get in touch with us if you're interested in discussing specific challenges and how to address these hazards. Thank you very much.
This is the interactive part of the presentation. From the Coastal Hazard Wheel landing page, you are able to browse to the interactive quick scan tool called Coastal Hazard Wheel app. This app is a web environment where users are allowed to carry out a quick scenario on any coast of the world. After a brief introduction on the left side of the screen, press Get Started to get to the interactive mode of the application. You see the whole world in front of you. In order to be able to investigate a particular coast of the world, there are a couple of options to move to your place of interest. Either move to browse to an environment that you know, or in this case, I give the example of Koror Palau Island. So I can type that into the search bar and find the correct place. Automatically we zoom into this specific area of the world. Press anywhere in the sea in front of the coast of Koror Island and all kinds of data will be acquired. Data such as surface elevation, land use, vegetation types, waves and tides. The code behind the quick scan tool collects all this data from global open data. The tool also uses a decision tree, the coastal hazard wheel, to derive a coastal classification, which is presented here in this part of the application. With each coastal classification, a series of risks that are scaled from low, medium, high to very high risks are presented. Due to the fact that there is also population data available, it is possible to assign an amount of population and amount of capital stock to this particular coastal environment. Let's explore now the maps behind this application. So here you see as a first map presented by default the coastal flooding risks. You can switch those layers off and for instance present some data on corals, for instance. Here you see that this area is protected by corals. There is a possibility to explore further maps like elevation, population density, etc. Please take a look at the coastal hazard wheel and use the application to get more insight into your coast and ask us to advise you further on the classification of complete country coasts. Let's stay in touch. My name is Gerhard Henriksen, Deltares, the Netherlands.
Thank you very much for this presentation and the demonstration of the application, Lars and Gerrit. Your work is very important in making the coastal classification and the hazard information available widely. This will boost a dialogue, which is very much needed between scientists, policymakers, but also the general public. And I would like to emphasize what you both said in your presentation, to invite the audience here and beyond to get in contact with you to explore the opportunities that this tool offers. We could hear from Stefan in his presentation that aquatic foods, fisheries resources are vital for small island developing states. We need to know what changes can be expected as a consequence of climate change. We have here today with us Professor William Chung and Dr. Gabriel Reigondo from the University of British Columbia. They will present the results of their modeling work of various scenarios for climate change. They looked into the impact of climate change on fish species distribution. William and Gabriel, the floor is yours.
Hello, I will present some of the key findings that my colleague Gabriel Reigondo and I did for a project commissioned by the FAO to project the future of coastal fishery resources in the small islands developing states under climate change scenarios. Gabriel is a research scientist and I am a professor and director of the Institute for the Oceans and Fisheries at the University of British Columbia. The ocean is absorbing much of the carbon dioxide emissions and the added heat generated from greenhouse gas effect. These leads to widespread and rapid changes in ocean conditions. Besides ocean warming, climate change is also leading to loss of ocean oxygen and increase in ocean acidity and sea level. Just to give you a sense of how the environmental conditions of marine species around the small island developing states are experiencing under climate change. These are the simulated past and future oceans conditions in the exclusive economic zones of small island developing states under climate change. These are based on the 3 Earth system model projections and the high and low greenhouse gas emission scenarios used in this study. It shows that intensifying climate change is projected to be increasingly causing ocean warming, loss of oxygen, and ocean acidification in the waters around the seas. There are already robust evidence to show that climate change has already adversely impacting mainly fish stocks and fisheries in small islands. These results are extracted from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the recent Working Group 2 report of the 6th assessment. Specifically, assessment of available knowledge has concluded that climate change is causing shifts in ecosystem structure, distribution range, timing of biological events in the small islands, and fishery resources has so far been negatively impacted as well. In this study, we particularly focus on the linkages between the shift in species range and fisheries yield. Marine species and invertebrates are adapted to survive and persist at specific range of temperature and other ocean conditions as well. These determine the latitudinal range and vertical distributions of the species. However, changing ocean conditions will affect the survival of the organisms at their original distribution. Fish and invertebrates will be able to adjust by shifting their distributions as ocean condition changes, typically towards higher latitudes and deeper waters. Shift in distribution ranges result in local extinction in a species' original distribution and range expansions into new area. Our study projects that these range shifts for exploited species and invertebrates in the seas will be happening under climate change. We included 41 seas and a broader comprehensive list of fishes and invertebrates that are important to the fisheries in these small islands countries. These species are based on a variety of information sources, including the FAO fisheries statistics, as well as other publicly available fisheries databases. Overall, the final species list covered all the species that represent up to 85% of the total catch of the seas. We then obtained the publicly available biological data and published databases from the published databases, such as the IUCN and FishBase. We use numerical species distribution modeling to predict species ecological niche, which is the combinations of environmental conditions that the species are likely to be adapted to survive and persist. All in all, our modeling works include 12 environmental variables, and our numerical analysis tests the importance of these variables in determining species leash and use the information to determine how much weight we should put on each environmental variable. We use a multi-modal ensemble approach. The approach includes 3 sets of Earth system model projections of future ocean conditions and 8 models to predict species distributions. The ecological niche is indicated by something called the habitat suitability index. The higher the index value, the more suitable the environmental conditions are to the survival and persistence of the species. Our modeling results project a loss of 10 to 50% of the number of exploited species in the exclusive economic zones of small island developing states in the 21st century. The level of impact depends on the time frame and climate change scenarios. The upper set of maps are for the 2050s, and the lower set are for the 2090s. The left panel are for low emissions, and the right panels are for high emissions. We only include the results from the 21 SIDS here. The 41 SIDS countries here. The changes in species richness is the net result of species local extinctions and expansions of species into new areas. In the worst case scenarios, climate change is projected to lead to the loss of almost half of the exploited species in the South Pacific, Western Indian Ocean, and Northern Caribbean Sea. But even in the low emission scenarios, we project substantial species losses and decrease in the number of species exploited by the fisheries. We use our projected changes in habitat suitability index as an indicator of risk of changes in species yield. Observed catches are strongly affected by fishing intensity, but it also depends on the carrying capacity of the environment for the species. In this project, we show that the projected habitat suitability index from our models are correlated significantly with observed catches in the waters around the SIDS. This provides us with support to use our projected changes in habitat suitability index as an indicator of changes in potential fisheries catches. We show that there are substantial risks of widespread loss of potential catches in most SIDS, particularly towards the end of the 21st century, even under the lower emission scenarios. Intensifying climate change is projected to increase the risk of loss of fisheries catches potential in the SIDS. Some of the SIDS are at very high risk to loss of fisheries important species and decreases in their fishery resources. These are the top 10 SIDS that are most impacted based on our projections. The different color bars represent different climate change scenarios and the time frame. For example, countries such as the Bahamas, the Seychelles, and Fiji are projected to lose many exploited species and projected fisheries catches among the SIDS across most of the scenarios and time. In summary, our study further supports that intensifying human-caused climate change is projected to result in widespread and pervasive loss of exploited species number as environmental conditions become unsuitable for them to survive and persist, particularly around SIDS. We also project increasing risk of decline in potential catches caused by the projected decrease in species carrying capacity. Our project highlights the need for climate mitigations to reduce the risk on exploited species and fisheries around the SIDS. In addition, ecosystem-based adaptations in relation to the projected changes in resources could help reduce risk. These ecosystem-based adaptations may include reduction of non-climatic drivers of environmental changes, rebuilding overexploited fish stocks, and adjustment to changing species compositions and distributions. With this, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, William, for this insight into your study, into your modeling work. You underlined what is at stake for the small island developing states regarding fisheries resources. We all know that the exclusive economic zones of these islands is often significantly larger than their own territory, land territory. And many of their economies rely on fisheries resources. Beyond presenting these scenarios of risks and changes expected, I think it's a very important message that you passed on the ecosystem-based management, that it can contribute to better adaptation of these changing circumstances. With that, we are coming to an end to the first part of the session with the presentations. And I would like to end that with a short poll, which my colleague Shushan will start right away. I kindly ask you to reply these questions. You can choose two options. What are the main challenges of small islands developing states' coastal areas? We will wait a little bit until we get some questions submitted. So participants here opted for ranking the degradation of coastal ecosystems highest. Some replies mention extreme weather events, food insecurity of coastal communities. Thank you very much for your replies. With that, we ended the poll, and a small announcement from the Coastal Hazard Wheel colleagues, Lars and Gerrit. The website was not working for a moment, but if you would like to check the application now, it's working again. So please don't hesitate to do that. That brings us to the second part of the event. We will move to the panel discussion. The panel discussion will have a more practical perspective, and we will react to the issues that were presented in the first part. It is an attempt to understand the experiences of the countries, of the small island developing states. As I mentioned, we have here representatives from some of these countries. They will talk to us about their successes, their experience, their challenges, and they will focus on how they address global climate change and biodiversity challenges. If you have any questions, I invite you to ask your questions through the Q&A function of Zoom. And after the panel discussion, our panelists and speakers will aim to answer them. With that, I would like to introduce our distinguished panelists. In addition to the speakers who made the presentations, we have here with us Mr. Philemon Tuivanu-Levu, who is a senior climate adaptation officer and a fellow at the Alliance of Small Island States. We have Mrs. June Yvonne Joshua Bryan from the Fisheries Department in Vanuatu. It is possible that June will not be with us here because she has problems of internet connection in Vanuatu. So we will see if we manage to re-establish the connection with her. And the next panelist is Mrs. Katia Neves, who is an assistant FAO representative of the FAO representation in Cabo Verde, and she is in charge of the program, of the FAO program about climate resilience. I wanted to ask a question to June to start with, but I am not sure she is connected. So I will right away turn to Katia with my question about Cabo Verde. You engaged in a major initiative with the Green Climate Fund on coastal zone management. Can you share your experiences, challenges, lessons learned?
Yes, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to be here and to share Cabo Verde experience. So yes, Cabo Verde has secured its first GCF funding through readiness that was approved in December 21. As a small island developing state, Cabo Verde is every other island, particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So the country's key economic sectors, which are fisheries and aquaculture, tourism and energy, were brought together under the blue economy with the leadership of the Ministry of Sea. And the idea is to address the climate challenge in those key actors. So the blue economy has been identified by the government of Cabo Verde as one of the SDG accelerator. We are in fact 92% maritime area. So the project started in May 2022, as it was approved in 2021. And the objective is to assist the government of Cabo Verde in fully mainstreaming climate issues in the blue economy's key sectors. As I said, fisheries and agriculture, tourism and energy. It is the first. And since it has been a long process, since we initiated it in 2019, accessing to climate funds are particularly challenging for small countries as Cabo Verde because there is limited national capacity to prepare the proposals and also to follow up with further comments and requests that come from the GCF, for instance, or another climate fund. So, and it also requires funds. So what have we done? So we have been supporting the government of Cabo Verde with the transition process from the maritime economy to a blue economy since 2015. Key documents were prepared, such as the strategic framework for the blue economy and the national investment plan for blue economy as well. This was done with the support of the African Development Bank, and with the approval of the donor, with part of the funding, we were able to secure the technical capacity to support, with the support of our GCF team from headquarters to write the readiness proposal, which was submitted in 2019. We received lots of comments and they were addressed. And so the key point and the experience that we had is that we were able to secure the funds, having the technical team to respond, and the government commitment and the interest in submitting for the GCF. So this, in terms of the challenges, it's as I said, it's always it's difficult to submit proposals with the limited capacity for a country as Cabo Verde. So they need the support from agencies such as FAO, but also there is another readiness proposal from UNIDO in targeting the tourism sector. So we created those synergies, and we were able also to engage with the government and having the focal points to respond and address all the comments that we received from the GCF. So this was done actually very good with the support of the government. So this is one of the things that I would like to share. Thank you very much. I'm available for questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Katja, for sharing this experience. Blue economy is indeed very important for these island states, and Cabo Verde is a good example of that. I particularly note that it's important to have this integrated approach to explore also the synergies, but it's very difficult to take that step because alone the sectoral measures themselves are not easy. And what you say about capacity building and access to finance, I think those are challenges which can be also characterized as a general problems for small island developing states. Thank you for sharing the experience. My next question is to Philemon. You are from the Alliance of Small Island States, which is an alliance primarily to represent the SIDS views at climate change negotiations. What is your viewpoint regarding the picture that has been drawn up here? What would you see? How do you see the importance of having a global approach for the SIDS to address the challenges presented earlier? So how can the SIDS best join forces? Can you explain that to us? I get the information from my colleagues that Philemon's connection is also disrupted, which is a real loss because he's his alliance, his organization has been very successful in presenting at the climate change negotiations, in instrumentalizing the position of the small island developing states at these negotiations. And I think advocating for the small island states at a global level is essential. These islands, if you look at the number of these small island states, you know, they represent almost a quarter of, or in fact a quarter of the United Nations member states. And in terms of population, they are 65 million people, so it's not so much. But as we said during the presentations, they are at the forefront of actions for the climate change, for climate change adaptation and mitigation. Why? Because they are impacted by it, both by the immediate impacts, but also by the slower impacts, like sea level rise. So I'm a little bit, it's a little bit sad that we lost the connection with Philemon. I hope he will be able to join us again. But with that, I will turn to those who are here from the panel. These are the challenges of a virtual panel, of course. And I will ask my next question to Lars. Lars, according to your analysis, what types of coastal environments in the SIDS have highest general hazard levels?
Yeah, thank you very much, Victoria. Yeah, so of course, as you say, I mean, generally there's exposure across the SIDS. So many of the SIDS are struggling with the coastal hazards and all the 5 different hazard types. But the most, how to say, threatened coastal types of the SIDS are the coral islands, and that could be both, you know, the atolls and the coral cays, and these low-lying, you know, islands with the dynamic coral reefs, and I mean, very vulnerable to sea level rise. And then, of course, for these islands, there's a difference between whether they're exposed to tropical cyclones or not. And if they're exposed to tropical cyclones, they're some of the most vulnerable places on Earth, basically. And if they're not exposed to tropical cyclones, they still have this big ecosystem disruption, you know, risk and hazard. And then they have the big risk or hazard of how to say, gradual inundation, where they slowly, you know, year by year get inundated. So, I mean, there's this kind of, the flooding risks for these islands might not be so high, but then the inundation, slow inundation hazard is very high. And then you have the flat hard rock coasts with corals and tropical cyclones have some of the same characteristics. And then, of course, some of these barrier systems, some of the sediment plains can also be quite dynamic sedimentary environments. So I mean, there's different, how to say, hazards and pressures, but there's the flooding, the erosion, and the how to say, the dynamics part, and then there's the ecosystem disruption parts. And of course, all of them apply to most of these places. So it is across the board. But you can say some islands have these hard rock sloping coasts, and they're actually quite robust. So there's also some positives. So I mean, as you saw, this I mean, second most common coastal type in the SIDS are some of these sloping hard rocks without corals, and they're actually quite robust. So we have some great vulnerabilities, and then some parts of them are also quite robust. So you have both, but most of them are very successful, I mean, exposed.
Thank you very much for this insight. It's important to, in my opinion, classifying the risks is a great help for defining priorities. And with that, I see now that Philemon is back to the panel with us. I'm glad to see that, Philemon. I hope your connection is working well now. So I will turn back to the question I wanted to ask you. I basically wanted to understand your viewpoint regarding the picture that has been drawn up here, and to give us a little bit the global perspective on the SIDS, how they address the challenges globally, and why is it worth joining forces?
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. So I'm Philemon, and I'm from Fiji, and I am part of the Alliance of Somaliland Developing Somaliland States. And just some perspective that I've seen in the presentations earlier, very, very much relevant to Fiji, especially, and in other parts of the Pacific, especially with our tourism and the tuna industry that we are highly reliant on for our economies. and the migration that will come about because of the change in temperatures of our oceans that has been highlighted as before. And as small and developing states, we are coming together to raise these issues on the global platform. I am right now calling from COP in Sharm el Sheikh, where the internet isn't very friendly to most of us, so I apologize if I drop off again. So I think in this type of platforms, we try and bring the attention of the climate and ocean nexus that is very prevalent in SIDS, so that we can come, so that developed countries can see the need and for us in our dire circumstances that we face now, especially with our small economies and small industries. So one thing that I also wanted to raise is that most of our economies in the SIDS are reliant on our tourism industry. And we have been seeing the impact of the change in climate on our corals due to coral bleaching and acidification. And that is something very worrying as we continue to see no good changes that are coming about. Additionally, we have mostly coastal settlements in Fiji especially, and just as the previous speaker had rightly said, tropical cyclones devastate these coastal communities who are facing the rise in sea level. And with this tropical cyclones that come, they are the most vulnerable. We right now in Fiji have about 42 communities that need to be urgently relocated. But because of our small economies, we just cannot afford to do so, which is why we have to do it a community, two communities at a time. And yes, I'm looking forward to the other discussions and other questions that may come about. Thank you.
Thank you, Philemon. And I in fact, thank you very much for bringing up the example of Fiji, because that gives us a very concrete insight into how you live these risks. And you mentioned your sectors, tourism, fisheries, coast, the problems with the communities. But with that, I would like to also come back to the program I'm managing, the Common Oceans program, because what we do here is that there are project activities which will directly work with the Fiji authorities to explore, for example, investment opportunities as well, to taking into account the changing environment, of course, but to see how to build a platform to work along the value chain for aquatic food production together with the very important tuna fisheries industry of Fiji, of course. Thank you for your reply. Katja, can I turn back to you with a question? Can you share with us some examples of conservation or management measures in Cabo Verde, which has been facilitated by the capacity development that you mentioned? You built institutional, human, financial, technical capacity. How this brings a result? What is the timeline you expect in terms of bringing results?
Yes. So the current project that we are implementing is an 18-month project, and it will enhance the capacities of the key sectors that I referred in terms of climate risk analysis, also in integrating those risks into the project, the managing of those sectors, but also in terms of developing innovative solutions that could be adapted to the country in terms of what we have been experienced. So we are doing right now the climate risk assessments for fisheries, aquaculture, tourism, and energy. We are going to we are creating thematic groups for tourism, also including the private sector and the civil society, and we will create a manual for the country to support the NDA to access to the funding. this is something that is going to be done under our project, but Cabo Verde has other experience in terms of managing coastal areas. So we have 80% of the population that is living in coastal areas, but we have created 47 protected areas in Cabo Verde, and 14 of them are marine. And the main challenge has been in terms of making them operational. But they have been the limits have been published recently by the government, and they are under the authority of the Ministry of Environment. We have come far also in partnerships with the NGOs that have been supporting the country in the management of the key species, for example, monitoring for sea turtles. Cabo Verde is the third site for careta turtles in the Atlantic, North Atlantic, and so there has been improved knowledge in terms of monitoring and also on the species. So, and the population has increased for the past years, and we have been securing the beaches because, as was said by Philomena, one of the main challenges is the tourism development and the occupation of the coastal areas by the tourism infrastructure. So this is something that has been done, but there is a need for more improvements in terms of capacity for governments, but also for monitoring and following up on the management plans that have been developed for some of the key areas. Not all of them, because there is need funding, and so the government is trying to assist funding from the JEF or adaptation fund and also GCF. So our project will, from the studies that would be developed, then the idea is to move forward for a full proposal. We are already preparing with the government, and we have identified 3 components, and one of the main approach that we are going to promote is the ecosystem approach, management of the coastal areas. So this is what I can share for now, but thank you.
Thank you, Katja. Very many good examples. I think one can see the effort you put into this integrated approach, and to focus on all the key sectors, but also with the consciousness of the impact on communities. Thank you for explaining these measures. I have plenty of questions still to William and Lars, but because we have this little bit delicate connection of Filimone, I will ask him the next questions in case there is any technical problems, okay? So Philemon, I'm coming back to you to talk about EOSIS support. How do you support your member countries? How do you secure financial resources to build climate resilience to coastal areas?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the question. As EOSIS, as a core negotiating group and representation in the United Nations platform, I think it is something that comes from the membership, the issues that they face. And of course, we try and ensure that there is access to the fundings that are available to enable innovation and reach some of our member states' ambitions and goals. And that in itself is a very complicated situation in dealing with access to funds, global funds that could help our small economies, and as well as also getting our members in touch with development partners, multilateral organizations that could give the right support in technology and expertise on how we can revamp our current structures to enable the continuous economic stability that we have for many of our states that are highly reliant on the fisheries. One example is the country of Kiribati. They're a small atoll nation, but a very, very large oceanic state. And because of the situations with the rising sea level and of course the effects of climate change, they're heavily impacted. With that, their economies would be very vulnerable to external factors as well. Just as when COVID came in, they were even in the most difficult situations because of the fisheries industry being on halt as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think what you highlight here is the real vulnerabilities, and the targeted action is needed, meaning in terms of access to finance, I suppose the sort of dedicated finance to these island states is essential in a way. But all this can only be used if there is capacity, and there we could hear from Katja that it's a long-term process to build all that up. Thank you very much for your reply. And thank you for being connected. Sorry for the technical difficulties you are experiencing. So with that, William, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Yes, so you mentioned in your presentation the impact of climate change on the coastal fisheries by the end of the century. Basically, can you give a few examples on adaptation measures that you think are key for the SIDS to apply?
Yes, sure. Thanks for the questions. In our projections, although we project that there are many species that will be negatively or adversely affected by climate change, some species will be more resilient, and some even may expand into the waters of the SIDS from outside, from other areas as well. So one possibility would be to develop capacity to take advantage of these potential new opportunities. But that would require co-development of actions and plan with local communities informed by science and projections such as those that we are providing in order to take advantage to help with reducing the overall impacts associated with other species loss. Other example of adaptations include ecosystem-based adaptations such as reducing pollutions or the effects of overfishing and protect key habitats because we know that climate change is going to adversely affect the environment for the important fish stocks and resources, and we don't want to make it worse. So having these conservation measures that reduce the non-climatic stress on these important fishery resources is also a effective way of helping to reduce the risk and as an adaptation measure.
Thank you very much, William, for these examples, and also for being not just negative, but also saying there can be positive changes as well. In fact, adaptation of fisheries is essential for these islands. I agree with you to make use to be aware of these changes, of these potential changes, and then to prepare their fleets for these changes. Common Oceans Program also works on this, more in deep sea fisheries, but also for tuna fisheries. And that will be done in the next 5 years. So we explore all possibilities for partnerships. So we might be able even to work together or use, your valuable modeling work. Thank you for that. Lars, my next question is to you again. Can you elaborate a bit more on relevant adaptation solutions for the SIDS, similarly to William, but from your angle?
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Victoria. Yeah, so of course, what to do in a specific island nation is of course a complex thing and has to be, looked at nationally. See where are the tricky hotspots, where are people living, where the asset values, and how is the whole coastal dynamics. So of course, there's some general, thoughts, and of course, to make some proper solutions, of course, one had to dive one step deeper to see what can be done. But as a first step, looking into these nature-based solutions would be a good first path, because as we saw, 61% of the SIDS have very high hazards of ecosystem disruption, and there are many you can either get on a slippery slope in terms of these ecosystem disruption, or you can actually get some momentum to use them as protection. And for mangroves, for example, if you have healthy mangrove systems and have enough sediment supply and available, mangroves might actually be able to keep pace with the sea level rise and actually grow with sea level rise. And along with that, mangroves can protect against, tropical cyclones and extreme events. So if you get a momentum of protected mangroves, you can both have, them following sea level rise potentially and protect against, these extreme events. And the same goes for coral reefs, so that if you have a degradation of coral reefs from, land-based sources, marine sources, plus the global pressures, then you have a downward spiral somehow. While if you can keep some kind of healthy coral systems, they protect against some of the other hazards. And then, of course, some places you have to look more into. I mean, for highly dense or more densely populated places, a combination of hard and soft measures might be relevant to do, with breakwaters and dikes and more hard structures combined with beach nourishment and these kind of things. But then again, one has to be really careful with these kind of dredging activities, because these SIDS ecosystems are so complex with the corals, and corals are really sensitive to sediment concentrations in water and these kind of things. So when you start, dredging and moving things around, you can potentially also disrupt these sensitive ecosystems. So this kind of combination of the nature-based solutions and more hard measures has to be considered very carefully. And then, of course, some places that are not so densely populated, and of course, it's difficult to protect, across the SIDS areas. You could say accommodation approaches could be relevant. That relates to, developing good, robust early warning systems, and that relates also to the UN Secretary General's recent, release of these global early warning systems for all. I mean, that could be really important, so people are aware now an extreme event is coming, and then potentially, building flood-proofing structures so you can still have a flood coming, but it doesn't damage buildings and infrastructure, and also have some kind of flood sheltering. I mean, that has been used quite a lot in delta areas where you have the flood shelters, so people get an early warning, and then they're able to, basically escape to shelters in time and bring their cattle and livestock and a lot of things. And if you look at these kind of big catastrophes in the past and in the big delta areas of the world, I mean, lots of people, lots of lives were lost, in the past. And this has actually changed recently, or the last decade or so, because better early warning systems and these escape, options. So there's many avenues, of course,
Yeah, thank you very much. I agree with you. Early warning systems are essential, and what you just said, that the solutions are adapted to the specific circumstances of SIDS. So in that sense, being aware what these characteristics are as a first step in the diagnosis and in defining the actions. Stefan introduced our event, so he was he gave us the big picture with his presentation. So after all these sharing of experiences, I'm asking him what he thinks can be done to maintain the performance of the aquatic food production of the SIDS. So what's your advice to these countries, very much depending on the fisheries and aquaculture sectors?
Well, thank you very much, and thanks to all the presenters and the discussion. It's been an excellent and very educational discussion today. I thought I knew the diversity of the SIDS and the diversity of the economic situation, social conditions, and the diversity of the species that are exploited by the SIDS. But now I know even more how really complex this is. I did realize, for instance, when I was in the Pacific in last April for Our Ocean conference and met a lot of people from the Pacific, that they are so different from one another, and there is no single silver bullet for all of them. But what we have learned in the course of this year, both from FAO, from UNDP, and the Blue Foods assessment from Stanford University, which I refer to all of them in my opening remarks, is that blue foods, aquatic foods, have a potential to sort of contribute to a low emission economy, or even growing. And I'm not sure how much, FAO says in the Blue Transformation Program that aquaculture globally can grow by 35% in the next 10 years or so before 2030. But in the SIDS, I don't think we have such an opportunity for enormous growth for aquaculture. But there is another opportunity, and this is in managing fisheries a little bit better, and a lot better in some instances, and also looking at the value chains for food, trying to improve storage, transformation, and this brings me to the equity question, because I'm struck by the fact that I've been working in Africa myself, and I've seen the situation in the Pacific and elsewhere, that sometimes the least nourished, most malnourished people, most stunted children are actually living in fishing villages because they don't get the food which should be sourced locally. And here I want to, before concluding, refer to my other coalition. I'm the chair of the Aquatic and Blue Food Coalition, but also I am a member and a founder of the School Meals Coalition. And I see enormous potential in the small island development, the islands, that they adopt school feeding programs based, contextualized, but including aquatic and blue food components for nutrition and for locally sourced food. And I think, and I'm absolutely convinced, that school meals programs in all of these countries would make a very, very good entry to get people to eat more fish, aquatic food, also create localist markets and private sector incentives to provide this kind of feeding. So I see school feeding as an entry vehicle to promote blue foods and get people really organized around it in those very different contexts. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan, very much for bringing up the food security aspect as well. How, aquatic food system which are made sustainably, which produce food sustainably, can contribute to better nutrition, life, and environment at the same time. So thanks very much for all your replies to the questions. I hope the audience got a little bit of a sense what it means for the small island developing states to face all these challenges of climate change, what it means for their sectors and for their coastal areas. And I would like to close now the second part of the workshop, so the panel, and go into a short poll to see what you think of these issues. So what is your view on priorities? What should seeds focus on to build climate resilience? Please give us your answers. I will wait a little bit until I see some participants replying. Okay, thank you very much for your replies. And I also have to say you are replying really fast, which is nice to see. You seem to know a lot about small island developing states. So to summarize for you, the participants here think that empowering coastal communities and increasing their adaptive capacity to climate change, developing adaptation plans and strategies for aquatic food production, and climate-proofing coastal zones management are the most important things to engage in straight away. Thank you. That brings me to the Q&A session. And when I check the Q&A session, I see that you submitted 3 replies. You submitted 3 questions. If you have any more questions in your mind that you would like to ask, this is the moment to do that. And these 3 questions have been already answered in written, I believe. Colleagues, can you confirm me? Yes, so all 3 questions have been answered in written, but I just will recall you what these questions have been, okay? And you can see the replies in the chat. Is it possible to have the events, presentations, and associated studies? We will indeed make these available, and the recording will also be available. Second question was about how the SIDS make use of the results of FAO studies presented at national and community level. In fact, I'm thinking this is a question where I would like to go back to Katja, if she could say a word on that. So how could SIDS make use of the results of the FAO studies presented at national and community level?
If we take, for example, one study related to climate risk assessments in fisheries and agriculture. So what we are doing is we are analyzing the trends for the past 15 years and making projections for the coming 30 years. And so we can see in terms of evolution for the biomass. So this can give information for the countries, and also we can work with the communities how they could adapt in terms of preventing, and also in terms of technologies that are using for capture, for instance, for example, and also it can support them to adapt for other species that we are not targeting, because in Cabo Verde, for example, communities that are targeting the same species, they are using the same areas to harvest. So with this information that we are providing with the studies, it's something that we can report back, and we can work with the communities in a more integrated approach and more ecosystemic approach. We are also using other tools, for example, to monitor those that could support to monitor those species. So it could involve the communities in a more participatory management of the resources. So this is something that we're going to do and have to discuss technical and with the communities together. We have started already with the one project, and we will continue with this one. So it can give projections for the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Katja, for your answer. And there is a third question which was asked to Philemon about the role of AOCs, which have been answered already in written. So you can track that in the Q&A section. That brings me to the conclusions. And we have here today with us Mr. Mohamed Mansouri, the director of FAO's Investment Center. And I would like him to share with us some closing remarks. Mohamed, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Victoria, and really it's a great pleasure to be here with you. And I very much appreciate this opportunity to wrap up this important side event that has put the resilience of small island developing states in the spotlight during these days of COP27. Just to remind all of us that the vulnerability of the SIDS to natural disasters and weather-related risks, coupled with their heavy reliance on food imports, 50% of the SIDS import more than 80% of their food, and nearly all the SIDS imports 60% or so of their food. That makes them the most economically vulnerable group of all developing countries. COVID-19 has caused significant losses in the tourism sector, an important source of income for many SIDS, limiting domestic resources to fight climate change. By disrupting international trade, the pandemic has also posed a threat to food security and nutrition. Today's side event has been, I think, really an important knowledge sharing opportunity, especially for the layman like me in the fisheries sector. Critical entry points to address climate vulnerabilities and increase the resilience of food production in SIDS have been identified. And this is what is really important for us coming from more the investment side here. I think the two studies or initiatives that led to, to the presentations today on coastal fish resources and coastal adaptation challenges equip us with much deeper insights into the challenges that SIDS face or are already facing. and how they might evolve in the decades to come. Importantly, the presentations provided us with good information, data, evidence, and that is a basis for us to plan and act. Let me just here, say a few a few learnings, especially for me here. So from Stefan, we heard that blue economy is neglected. Okay, that it represents it would represent the 5th economy in the world, the economy of Germany, and the importance of blue foods, including their lesser gas emission impact, is very important. And those are really assets we need to build on. Adaptation and resilience are key, as through blue food, we sustain livelihoods and food security of millions, and we can greatly contribute to decarbonize our economy on, if we base more or the way we feed ourselves and our kids on more blue food. Climate change is one of the stressors, but we should not underestimate the mismanagement of the oceans and the related ecosystems. The presentations by my colleague Lars, by Gerrit, and by Professor Chung are part of our efforts of building the evidence base for more and better climate investments in SIDS, in particular with the financing of the GCF. And it's about really understanding the coastal environments to measure the exposure to different risks for ecosystems, communities, and livelihoods, and subsequently to identify the right entry points when it comes to policy change or reform and to investment. So from Gerrit Hendriksen from Deltares, I think it's really a groundbreaking work, because assessing the coastal diversity and ecosystems will allow us to map the risks and prioritize the investments. And as Stefan was saying, investment should be very contextual, because the situations are so different. Even in the same SIDS, the exposure of the different islands and so on pose very different challenges and need different solutions. So knowing those risks will allow us to identify those solutions and discuss the policies, the actions, the investments. Finally, having all these data available in a simple app, is a great thing, and will allow us for better engagements and accountability of public and private stakeholders in this space. Professor Chung from British Columbia University made an important and disruptive presentation. Again, the data is showing that climate has already changed and, and had impacts on fisheries and ecosystems. And that is affecting, the communities. Impacts of those changes will not be only economic. It will be also has severe impacts on the cultures, on the traditions, on the changes in the life of the people and the communities. Hence, the human capital dimension, in the SIDS, and how we can invest more in the human capital is very important, in the capacities of the people, of the community. The evidence also underscores that it's very important to support the blue transformation agenda. And this is why I'm so happy today that we're working together with our, fisheries departments to move, this climate investment in SIDS together. So ensuring healthy ecosystems is really the key guarantee to, for better livelihoods and protection of coastal communities, their infrastructure, and ultimately their livelihoods. If not, the evidence presented today confirms that we need just to act and create the conditions for impactful climate investments. Today's discussion showed us a possible heading, a way. We need, I think, to work on many fronts. Enhanced coordination, enabling policies, innovation, and more and better quality investments. This is, working together what we need to really push for a sustainable transformation of the agri-food systems in the vulnerable countries like SIDS. So assisting the communities that suffer from and pay the full price of climate change is an important mission for all of us, not only FAO, but for the broader community. And we need 4 aspects that are essential: collaboration between all of us. I think private, public sector, government, farmer, fishermen, CSO, consumer organizations, research, finance, UN, we need to work together. Fostering innovation and learning and building human capital is very important, because those solutions should need, these challenges need new solutions. If we just repeat the same solutions, we will be just repeating the same results. And sustainability of the new investments, not only to reduce the risks of increasing pressure on marine and coastal ecosystems, but also all the other investments that are made need to be looked at from the lens of sustainability. And finally, scaling up the climate finance is crucial for the SIDS. The financing needs are way beyond the capacity of public balance sheets of the SIDS, and we need donors and the private sector to jump in. So as you know, we at FAO, we provide a wide range of technical assistance and investment support, and our investment center serves as the primary vehicle for FAO to support both public and private investments in our member countries. In the recent years, we really put a lot of focus on climate investments, mostly working with the GCF, but also beyond with our more traditional financial partners such as the World Bank and IFAD, African Development Bank, Inter-American, and others. And gradually, as my colleagues were saying, we're exploring the new approaches to invest along climate resilience, coastal, natural-based, and ecosystem-based solutions to strengthen the adaptation to climate change impacts and support mitigation. To conclude, I think that's, the challenges are there, but when I listen very carefully, there is a strong commitment from all of us. So there is a way, and if there is a way, there is a solution. So let's build on our collective knowledge, energy, and drive to work together and bring about the transformation that our SIDS countries need. As the clock is ticking, let's act fast and together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohamed, for these closing words. Very important messages there. I think that links up very nicely with the key messages that are coming out of COP27 so far, which is to strengthen action, so to deliver, deliver, deliver. And with that, I'm closing this event. Thank you very much to all our panelists and speakers for having been here today with us to talk about the challenges of small island developing states, to prepare for climate change, to build their resilience. Thanks to all the participants here in Zoom and also those who have watched us live on the web. This event will be available as a recording. I hope you enjoyed participating. Thank you and goodbye.